We're going to call the finance meeting to order, and we're going to say we have a judiciary committee in here, and I've talked to parliamentarian, and they're permitted to participate in the Q&A simply if we get down to the time today where we vote on this budget to report it to the floor. This is an actual finance committee meeting, so we'll do that. But what we're going to do is just a couple things. Obviously, I've been charged with the responsibility to prepare a budget, and given the constraints of the time we're in and the revenue we know we have today, at least what the Senate has acted upon, that we have put together a budget, and we want to try to be as clear as we can. We recognize that the state budget is kind of a complicated process in this sense. You're dealing with the revenues and the expenditures within a snapshot time frame. So that in order to get money into your budget from previous savings or other revenues, you've got to do some things in the budget document to get it there to help you balance a general revenue section of a budget, the general revenue section just being 1/3 of the budget. I know the public, when they hear about it, they think it's the whole budget. For example, the highway department is not in the general revenue budget. I hear people say things like, well, you could do this and save money in highways. Well, that doesn't help in the general revenue budget. The general revenue budget, basically, as you'll see the accounts, we're not going to go through, we will go through as much detail as we've got here, but we've got a presentation. But the general revenue budget basically deals with the Board of Public Works, deals with the Department of Commerce, other agencies, but the major parts of it are public education, DHHR, military affairs and public safety, and higher education. As we go through this presentation, I'll tell you in advance, there are some across-the-board cuts at 2% and some at 10%, but there's no changing the revenue, let me say it this way. The governor's budget as it comes to us cuts $86 million of last year's baseline budget. Those cuts we recognize. If you vote on them, you're voting to cut government if you vote for the $86 million. There were significant cuts to higher education, significant cuts to others that we did not pile on those. So we didn't add any percentage cuts over and above the 4% that's already there. But those are just a few opening remarks. I do not, obviously it would be a happier time if we weren't so low on the revenue, but from this chairman's perspective, we are to the point, as my leadership has stated, of trying to get something started. There's probably things in here many of you may not be happy about. I'm sure we will hear about that throughout the day. But, it's a budget. It's some place to start. Obviously, there will be an amendment stage in this committee meeting a little bit later, and then, Vice Chairman will move to adopt the budget, and then we'll see where we are at that point. So at this point, I'm going to recognize, and I don't know if you have to move around to see this, but you may have to. The screen isn't large if you're on the other side of the room, but we're going to make a presentation about this budget, give a little history, and so Michael Cook is going to do that. He's over there. I'm going to walk over there and stand next to him or sit somewhere over there. So if in the process of this, we'd probably, I would say, let him finish it all first, take notes, and we'll take questions afterwards. It's my understanding that this presentation, I see that Chris has got, or Senator from Putnam, has got the presentation on his Surface, this one that Michael is going to do. And I think Richie was going to explain to you now exactly how you could get to that. So we'll have him do that first. Is he over there?
Yeah, he's right on the other side. He's fixing face Myers. You want
Actually, I guess he's a full-service guy. He's going from desk to desk to help you actually do it. So if you have a passion to have it right now, just raise your hand, and I guess you'll be next. So. And Chris, Senator from Putnam knows how to do it as well. All right, Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. What we have before us here is the presentation for the committee substitute for Senate Bill 1001, the budget bill. We always include a couple of slides in budget presentations that explain that the budget is developed on a cash basis, and it only includes revenues and expenditures expected to be realized during the fiscal year, plus any surplus balances from the previous fiscal year available for appropriation. The legislature is constitutionally required to pass a balanced budget, and that means that the estimated revenues and unappropriated fund balances must be equal to or greater than the appropriations. So I thought it might be helpful to start where we left off with the 2017 budget bill. At the end of the extended regular session, the budget gap ultimately grew to around $271 million. The conferees began their task of trying to balance a budget with an end goal of trying to fill a gap of around $178 million. However, without the passage of some of the tax measures and due to the continuing decline of revenues, the revised revenue estimate included an additional unanticipated $92.7 million that neither side had accounted for in its budgets. So what makes up the $271 million? The original introduced budget was based on anticipated revenue measures and legislation that ultimately did not pass in the regular session. And it included the cigarette tax at $78 million, the telecommunications tax at $60 million, the revenue measure of transferring general revenue to the road fund of $9 million, racetrack modernization of $9 million, general revenue surplus section of $7.8 million, and revised retirement numbers that were included in an adjustment letter and that were ultimately part of the committee substitute for Senate Bill 269 of $15.3 million, and the failure of Senate Bill 452, the school aid formula bill, of $15.2 million for $194,430,000. There were some adjustments that were made, and with those adjustments, the shortfall becomes $178.2 million. Add the $92,775,000 that was included in the revised revenue estimate, and that makes up the $271 million shortfall that everyone has been talking about. So there's the projected gap that we have to work with. And this gap, as it appears here, assumes that there would be no revenue measures passed during the special session. So the governor's newly introduced budget assumes the passage of and includes revenue from two of the three tax measures that were introduced. Those were Senate Bill 1003, imposing consumer sales and service tax and use tax on telecommunications and ancillary services at $60 million. Senate Bill 1004, increasing consumer sales and service tax and use tax at $196 million, which he included. And Senate Bill 1005, increasing the tax rate on cigarettes and tobacco products at $78 million, which were also included. So in anticipation of the passage of those two measures, the governor actually has more than enough to fill. The governor's bill, as proposed, filled the gap and had a little surplus of $274 million. So the construction of the committee substitute for Senate Bill 1001 is built and it's balanced by including the tobacco tax revenues. There are some base budget cuts in general, lottery and excess lottery. There's some general revenue use of limited unclassified appropriations. There's some one-time use of general revenue reappropriation through expiration in the actual budget bill. And that also, by using that method, it reduce the amount of rainy day fund by around $7.4 million. There's one-time money in both special revenue and non-appropriated special revenue that is expired. There are 3 surplus sections, 2 of which the governor included in his bill, the lottery and excess lottery surplus sections. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 1001 includes a general revenue surplus section and the use of rainy day funds. So the next few slides just illustrate in larger numbers what is contained in the budget as far as revenues and how we balance the tobacco tax at 78 cents and a description of how that, what makes up the $78 million. The additional base budget and one-time general revenue reductions in the committee substitute are around $36.7 million. So the total base budget general revenue reductions are $122.1 million overall, as the chairman mentioned, because it incorporated those cuts that the governor had already included in his introduced budget. There are also some other notes there that talk about the limited use of unclassified appropriations and reducing appropriations within general revenue funded agencies to allow agencies a little more flexibility in how to reduce their budgets. It includes $8 million in voluntary legislative reductions. The House reduction amount is not included in your budget, but ultimately they were included in their budget. More specifically, though, this amount is in addition to the Senate voluntary expiring an additional $2 million from its reappropriated balance, and also participation in the governor's mid-year budget reduction of $238,088. And the current year's budget, 2016, the Senate had reduced its budget by $500,000. Overall, it includes a 2% across the board raise, or sorry, not a raise, a 2% across the board reduction with some exceptions. And some of those exceptions include the judicial branch, the Department of Health and Human Resources, public education with a targeted reduction there, higher education, corrections, protective services, state police, seniors, and then there's a 10% across-the-board reduction for constitutional officers. So the use of special revenue expirations in this bill, there you will see in special revenue some directed transfers, expiring funds from special revenue funds directly to the Medical Services Trust Fund or Medicaid. And by using that method, it reduces the amount of general revenue Medicaid that's needed to balance the budget. So it provides money in general revenue to use for other areas and makes up for it through directed transfer in the special revenue section of the budget bill and in section 12 of the budget bill. The use of lottery expirations and reductions. The $2,528,240 includes the removal of $1,558,000 for the Greenbrier Golf Classic. That amount, I've heard different amounts used, but as part of the governor's 4% reduction, the Division of Tourism had already taken their budget reduction from that particular item. So the amount that we reduced in the budget bill in the committee substitute is the amount that was anticipated to be transferred to the Greenbrier, and that was $1,558,000. Other reductions include a 25% reduction to the Fairs and Festivals line appropriation and to Preservation West Virginia, and the removal of funding to the West Virginia Public Theater, Theater West Virginia, and the George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War. The reduction or elimination of these things in lottery, and this will be a repeated message throughout the rest of the presentation, but by doing reductions and expirations like this, it allows money in general revenue, it allows appropriations to be reduced there to relieve the pressure on general revenue and be maintained by what was reduced or expired in lottery. Use of excess lottery expirations, $4.1 million, and that was just the appropriation. That's the $4.1 million that is included I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing this. Fund 7213, appropriation 70014. There's a $14.2 million appropriation. 4.1 of that was for Greyhound purses, and so this would eliminate the funding for the Greyhound purses. There's a general revenue surplus section that's created in the committee substitute. The surplus section is from the inclusion of exception language that reduces that allows us to, again, reduce the general revenue Medicaid appropriation and fund it in the surplus section of the budget bill. And the use of rainy day funds, $140,927,738. I'm going to have to move to the side here. Technically, though, the use of the rainy day funds would be $5,736,618 less because, as I mentioned earlier, the committee substitute for Senate Bill 1001 does not include the House of Delegates reduction to their budget. So that's $2 million that would be realized in a final budget bill. And also the money that was expired and moved to the surplus section of general revenue, half of that became available for that section, and the other half is transferred to the rainy day fund. So technically, that appropriation would be less. I'm having trouble seeing it. Thank you. I could do both. Okay. Oh, great. There's some information included on the presentation about the rainy day fund overall. Lottery revenues included in the budget bill, nothing changed. The total is the same as set forth in the budget, $135,561,119. Appropriations within lottery remain pretty much the same as the governor had recommended, with the exception of the Division of Tourism by the removal of funding for the Greenbrier Golf Classic, from the Division of Culture and History, the reduction of fairs and festivals and Preservation West Virginia by 25% each, and the removal of the West Virginia Public Theater, Theater Arts of West Virginia, and the George Tyler Moore Center for the study of the Civil War. And again, as I said, the message is the same here, that by the removal of those items or the reduction of those items in lottery and excess lottery allows us to reduce general revenue by those amounts, move the appropriations back to lottery or excess lottery. Excess lottery is the same, $284,459,230. All of the appropriations within excess lottery remained relatively the same, with the exception of the reduction of Fund 7213, appropriation 70014, the licensed racetrack regular purse fund, and that money was moved, stayed in excess lottery. It was just moved to the Medicaid appropriation within excess lottery. So Medicaid was increased by the same amount in excess lottery. There are 3 budget bill surplus sections. We've talked about surplus sections in the past. The general revenue surplus section that's a part of the committee substitute of $3,736,618. And the governor had included a lottery surplus section of $8 million to be used for the Bureau of Senior Services. I'm sorry, the general revenue surplus section would be used for Medicaid. And the excess lottery surplus section of $30 million for Medicaid. So these pieces provided a framework to start to build a budget based on the projected revenue that was available at the time of the construction of the document. It doesn't necessarily reflect a final product, but rather a starting point. Each of these pieces put together and are based on the actual revenue available at the time of consideration that you have it before you today. If passed, it provides the foundation and a framework that would fully fund or fund without further reduction and continue DHHR, the Promise Scholarship and other scholarship programs, the state police, public education, higher education, seniors, corrections, PEIA, retirement systems would be fully funded, and debt service, all of the debt service would be paid. But most importantly, even if the construction of it is universally disliked, the passage of the bill would continue government and provide an opportunity to take a closer look at some of these items that we had constraints within this special session, to look at them legislatively instead of trying to get to these things through the budget bill. So I'm not going to read each of these. They're in your presentation, but these are the total recommendations for fiscal year 2017. And then there are some pie charts at the end. And again, this is just based on the committee substitute for the Senate bill. And those are also included in your presentation.
All right, I know that was a quick tutorial on the budget process, and so I recognize, I guess she'll have to turn the microphone on. Senator from Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. I know the tobacco tax, you've got about $36 million in new cuts, apparently. Am I correct in my math? And $141 million from the rainy day fund.
No, yes and no. What Michael said, and I know it's hard to capture, is that's the number that gets added, but there's about, the rainy day will be reduced once the House does their budget. By how much?
They have $2 million, and then there's the additional money that is transferred to rainy day as a result of the surplus.
Yeah, let me just take a minute to explain something. In budgeting, when you transfer money to the surplus section of the budget, which he did do, half of that money by statute, remember if you have a surplus in your budget, has to go to the rainy day fund. So that'll be about $3 million more that's actually going to be reduced from that 140, whatever you said it was, plus $2 million from what the House will do when they do their budget. So it's actually about $135 million, 136.
So actually 135 or 136.
Yes.
I'm obviously concerned about the use of one-time money to fix the budget, because going forward, that money will no longer, it's depleting the one-time monies we do have available, obviously, and without any additional revenue, I am gravely concerned that, of course, I won't be here to have to worry about it in January, but going forward, some of you that are here are going to have continued ongoing, even more problems to face. I also am concerned if we pass this budget out with 136 to 100 or 135 to 141 $1 million rainy day fund cut, I'm not so sure the ink will be dry before the governor vetoes it downstairs. So I'm gravely concerned whether this is a solution or if it's just a temporary opportunity for us to look like we're doing something, but realistically, unless you've had some discussions with the governor that some of us others have not, I'm not confident that this will fly and survive his veto pen.
Come back on. Michael, come here. Michael, this one, come up here. Just a comment on the comment that the governor has the power to veto certain sections of the budget. He can reject certain sections or all of it. So, yeah, and he can reduce that amount if he chooses and still have a budget intact. And also I would point out that if you think about it, and it's not been talked about in the public a lot, but the number was up there. Actually, this budget reflects a $122 million baseline budget cut from last year's budget. We have to give credit or recognize that this budget started off with an $86 million baseline budget cut to state government. So that, and that was on top of a $95 million spending authority cut the governor doled out to his agencies last year in the middle of the crisis of last year. So, from my perspective, the rainy day money is large, but it's about equal to the amount of baseline budget cuts in this overall budget as presented. It's not, it's a little greater than, and going forward, we may be able to get the rainy day in the combination of both bodies below the baseline budget cuts that are in that would be in this budget. If you voted for the governor's budget fully funded with his revenue, you're still voting for $86 million in cuts. So it's though you focus on the 22 or the 24, and I know that's been the conversation, but from my perspective as finance chairman, it's a budget that's pretty well it's pretty well funded with about the same amount of rainy day as cuts when you combine all the cuts, governor's cuts and our cuts and whatever else may surface. So, you know, would you like to respond to that?
Cuts at least are things that are cutting in the base budget going forward, but this money out of the rainy day fund will, at some point, is going to be depleted if we keep.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. That's not in dispute.
And I don't mean to be critical, because I think you've done a great job with the amount of money you have to work with, but at the end of the day, you know, I think you would agree with me, at least privately, that the solution is not raiding the rainy day fund, but it's additional cuts in an ideal world, or additional revenue, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that structurally is going to move us forward.
All right, thank you for your comments. Are there others? Figured there might be more. I'm looking at the Finance Committee. Do you have your hand up? No, you're just clicking your pen. All right. If there's no more questions of our analysts, then are there any amendments to this budget? Well, hearing none, where's my vice chairman? I recognize the vice chairman for a motion. Do you have the motion written out?
I don't have the motion written down. The bill numbers...
Bill number is 1001.
Mr. Chairman, I move that Senate Bill 1001 be recommended...
Committee substitute.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 1001 be recommended to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass.
All right, you've heard the motion of the vice chairman. Is there any discussion? Senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a question to you.
Turn back. It was getting feedback. That's why we're turning. Okay.
Okay. We've only had this budget for a couple hours, at least access to it. And so we've tried to work very hard to look at it. So there's a lot to this, and I understand you're now putting it up for a vote. So with just a short presentation and giving us a couple hours to look at it, but I guess the one question I would at least start with is this: it appears in your recommended budget that what you're doing, well, I'll let you all talk it out, and then I can ask my question, because I want to make sure you get my question.
I'm sensitive to the fact that it's hasty, and I don't want to be hasty, so that I anticipated far more questions than we got, and we were going to go into some detail about the cuts and so forth. But if the committee would like to take an hour, and I'll be happy to entertain more specific questions off floor, or you can ask questions now. I'll go back to that stage, and if you have specific questions that you'd like to answer, we'd be happy to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, you're not wanting to be hasty, I think that that's an understatement as far as what's happening here, but I mean, I do have some questions, and I'm sure once I be able to read everything. I mean, this budget, keep in mind, you just introduced this shortly after the floor session, and I don't know, there's no page numbers to it, so it's a pretty thick document. I don't know, 300 page. I haven't been able to even have time to count how many pages are here. I've looked through it as quickly as I can. I know some of the members from the Democratic caucus would like more time to look at it and be able to read it before we vote on it. I think that's only fair to our constituents that we actually read bills before we vote on it. But my question, I guess, to start off, it appears that in these cuts, and I understand you've done 2% across the board except for some specific areas, which are more cuts, and that's 2% on top of the 6%, 4% total. So, I'm sorry, do I have your attention, Mr. Chairman?
I do. I'm listening to you.
Okay, thank you. I see where there's 2% on top of the governor's 4%, and then some areas it's significant cuts even beyond that, is what we ascertain. But in those areas where you have 2%, it appears as if what's happening is instead of going in and cutting specific line items, it looks like you're zeroing out all the line items and putting the money into unclassified.
That's correct in several areas.
And I'm just wondering, on your logic for that, as far as zeroing all the different items out and then placing it under...
The logic was, that, to be correct, is that in certain areas we were aware that, given the constraints that I've been given, that in order for us to go in and cut the specific lines, that it would be up to the agency head to decide how to spend their money, in this instance this year, relative to where they, that way they can decide exactly how to apply that 2% cut to their office. Except in one area, the agricultural commissioner, it wasn't done that way. It was, if you look at the agricultural commissioner's line, it was 10%, but not, they didn't collapse into unclassified. The law says for the public to understand, when the governor introduces a budget, he can only put 1% in the unclassified line. But we as a legislature have the right to rewrite that section and put it into the unclassified section for that agency to determine how they would manage that particular cut that would be coming to them. And we understand that there's a side-by-side on your system. And actually, on this document that he is passing out, the one that Michael did, in the footnotes, all of the significant cuts are actually described there in the footnotes. If we want to take time to go over slowly that document again, he kind of went over it. He had to walk around, but all the significant cuts of the larger number are in that document, or footnoted in that document.
Well, I think that would be helpful.
Otherwise, you've had the governor's budget, and the difference between the governor's budget that you've had on the system for a while and our budget would be those cuts that are in that on that document.
Like I said, I think that would be helpful, but the issue on the unclassified aspect is to, you say you want to leave it up to the agency heads to decide on...
Well, we felt like we had to because we, given the time constraints of this process, we were unable to vet exactly which sections that they would cut. So rather than us determining something that they would say, gosh, we'd rather you cut this than that, we're basically saying in this emergency situation, which is the only way you can frame this, that we would do what we probably would not necessarily like to do, would be give an agency head control over the money, I mean, so that we would expect that they would be responsible and do the right thing and not just do something that shouldn't be done. And, you know, a lot of those, the personnel line is one of the largest ones anyway, and it's not a lot. If you look at a lot of them, there's not a long list of things there that you're collapsing into unclassified for this budget. So that's, you asked the reasoning, that was the reasoning. When I was given the charge to do a 2% across the board cut, that was the way to get it done, and to get it done in the time constraints that I've been given.
And I appreciate that. However, as a policy body, a legislative body that is required to actually be held accountable for the budget, because the legislative branch is the branch that deals with the budget, that actually in some way respects, it's been talked about quite a bit down here in the past, that such a move to go in unclassified categories is actually giving up our responsibility as a legislative branch to really truly examine the budget and to know where that money is going to be appropriated. And particularly when it comes to taxpayers, we really have to be held accountable to know where that money is being spent. But going in unclassified and just leaving the agency to spend the money the way they want, then we're actually
we didn't do that
position.
we didn't do that across the board, and we did it with the ones that basically have personnel lines and current expenses and different things. But if there was a long list of things, you know, like in economic, you know, if there was a long list of things, we did not collapse a lot of these. It was just, I think we did the Board of Public Works, didn't we? Most of those, and I'd have to go through, but they were smaller sort of agencies who don't have very many lines, so that they weren't like, it's not all across, it's not a whole unclassified budget. It was just doing in those areas that we didn't feel were that onerous or and again, I said the one area that there's a long list of activities is in the Agricultural Commissioner, and though there was an across-the-board cut, all those lines were kept in there because that's the long one for the Board of Public Works. So we didn't unclassify that one. Maybe he would have liked that, but that's not what happened. So it's been done. It's not, again, it's a budget that I'm not happy with, but, you know, July the 1st is down the road, and, you know, I don't know if this is the final destination or the end of this process, but it's the beginning. As Michael pointed out, we did not, in this budget, we preserved several of the significant parts of our state life without cuts at all. Higher ed, PIA, what were they all? Public ed, the retirement systems. You know, there's been a lot of pressure to cut retirement contributions. That didn't happen in this budget. State police, corrections, they didn't take a cut. So we're starting, you know, with some of the things that, I mean, the fairs and festivals were cut 25%. I'll tell you, you can look at it and see it in there. The what's it called? The preservation? West Virginia Preservation, which is also sort of a fairs and festivals, was cut 25%. Those are significant. Certain things were that the Commissioner Randall Reed Smith recommended 3 different types of projects that no longer needed money. We cut those. We went into the commerce line, and there are several things. This is what the Secretary of Commerce said to me. I hope he doesn't mind me repeating him, but there are several pass-through accounts in the Department of Commerce, money that get passed over to 501c3 corporations. They're not really state agencies. They're private nonprofits. So we basically we took the money from those, but we did unclassify that section for the Secretary of Commerce to decide. but we like preserved. We looked at one today and realized that we'd made a mistake, and in your first document that you got, we corrected it, so I want to state that correction. We accidentally, the only thing I think that we didn't mean to do was on the Hatfield and McCoy Trail, we preserved that funding as not at the discretion of the Secretary of Commerce. In the original document that we sent out, you'll have to look at the second one, we put it back in. That's been corrected in the last hour or so.
But, Mr. Chairman,
So those are some
I
of
don't
the-
know how many areas that you have actually collapsed in unclassified, but some of them that are coming up, just looking at it, the Public Defender Service.
Right now.
No, this is perfectly permissible.
I'm in line with my
Let him withdraw the
questions.
motion, and
Well, I'm asking questions on the motion, which is the budget bill, and I'm in order.
I'm not a parliamentarian, but I have no
Well-
problem.
I am, and I know we are, so.
So I have no problem with the gentleman's questions at all.
So
But-
the question's on the budget, and that's what the motion's before us.
Correct?
Okay. So in the classification, as far as you got the Public Defender Services, you got the Air Quality Board, you have tax. I mean, it goes on and on. Division of Natural Resources, you've collapsed into unclassified. Division of Labor, you've collapsed in unclassified. The Development Office, the Geological and Economic Survey. I mean, it goes on and on where we
Senator, if I
collapsed
could...
it. Department of Commerce, Forestry.
Okay, please.
So, I mean, there's several areas. But the question on this unclassified approach is that we've had this debate in this body before where this has been challenged.
Could I interrupt you for just a second, and then I'll return
Oh, okay.
briefly?
I was going to...
I'm going to ask the Vice Chairman to withdraw his motion, and I'll take us back to the amendment stage. And that way, if you want to propose amendments to bring those lines back in as they were in the original governor's budget with a 2% cut across the board, I'll entertain that motion. So I recognize the Vice Chairman for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I request unanimous consent to withdraw my motion.
All right, the motion's been withdrawn. I would like to go back, I don't know if parliamentarily wise, this brings us, we can go back to amendments, but I'm told we can. So if you find it objectionable, what we did in terms of unclassified, it would take a while, but we could go back in and just take a 2% cut across all those different sections. It wouldn't take us forever, I don't think. But you won't have it today. But that would be a legitimate motion. I can be chided for all I did about it, but you're a member of the committee, sir, so I assume that if you don't like that, you can move to have it all amended, and we'll see what the body says. I mean, I'm not going to try to override you. I mean, if you don't think it's right, then make a motion. If you
Well, I just have questions. So I might get to that point, but I still got some questions
All right.
for you, Mr. Chairman. So by doing that, though, I know that several years ago, this body had a great debate on the fact that this was not acceptable as far as taking it into the unclassified area. And matter of fact, even the chairman of the Finance Committee of the House was part of those discussions during that time of the Tomlin administration about transparency, and that we call for more transparency in state spending plan. And it goes on in the sense that those unclassified areas doesn't allow for this budget to be transparent. So I just, again, I caution us as we go in there is because we have no idea what is going to be cut, what's not going to be cut, what's going to be funded, what's not going to be funded by the budget that's before us. So if that means you can take it back and give us the answers of what those items are going to be and what's going to be funded, then I think that would be good information for us so we can vote on this bill. So what these how these unclassified areas of how that's going to be spent, I think is going to be critical information on, especially for us, being able to go back to our constituents and tell them exactly what we voted on and how their money is going to be spent. I think that's transparency. I think that's good government. And I think that's what we need to do as representatives of the people. So however you want to tell us how those unclassified areas are going to be spent, I think that'll be good information for us.
Well, obviously, if we give an unclassified line to an agency, I don't know how at the end of the day they're going to spend it, but I can say that we could look through some of them and see that their current expense lines, their personnel lines, and there's not a lot of, I can't think of any that, as I was looking at them in the side-by-sides that we've looked at, that were more than 4 or 5 lines. Just a minute. Okay. Yeah. Here they are. Excuse me just a minute. All right. All right, let me just talk about a couple of them. Division of Purchasing. Here are their lines: personnel services and employee benefits. Unclassified, a small amount, the governor put it in. They've got current expenses, repairs and alterations, $700, equipment, $1,000, other assets, $1,000. Personnel services employee benefit line was $1,005,000. So what we did is we just collapsed the budget from most of which it's $1,005,000. It's now $1,040,000. We just put it all in one line and took a 2% across-the-board cut rather than applying 2% to $1,000. We just did it that way, and so there's not a lot of leeway there. Travel management's the same way. So that current expense line is pretty heavy, but that's travel management. That's what they're going to use to fly the planes, I suppose. And, the grievance board had $918,000 in an employee line, $165,000 current expense, $1,000 in unclassified, and $7,800 in brim premium. So we collapsed that one. See, that's the point I'm making. These are just agencies that you don't have a lot of those particular lines. And so that's what we did. I mean, to make it simpler, and it doesn't, I think, do violence to the loss of control of the legislature with those types of accounts. So that would be my answer.
So some of the other areas that's collapsed and we don't know what's spending, say, for example, the State Board of Rehabilitation. It looks like independent living services has been zeroed out. Ron Yost personal assistant fund's been zeroed out. Employment attendant care program's been zeroed out. Heck, even the brim premium's been zeroed out. Supported employment extended service has been zeroed out, and all put in unclassified, which theoretically, I guess they could spend it all on salaries. I mean, if it's not appropriated for those particular services, I guess they could spend it on salaries or personal services or employees' benefit of the $12 million that's actually there.
If you want to move, I would counsel you, if you dislike what we did there, and you want to move that we restore back, however the motion would be constructed, the several funding lines and just reduce them all by 2% in that particular account, we'd be happy to entertain the motion.
This is your proposal. I'm not proposing that 2% ought to be in each of those categories. But the thing I am proposing is I don't think it's appropriate for us to put it in unclassified and not be held accountable by the taxpayers of where we're going to spend money. The other thing is, I think we're trying to hide it, to put it on the agency to say, we're not really cutting, you're going to cut. So the bottom line is, I think that we ought to have a real plan here, something that's transparent and accountable to the people of West Virginia so they know exactly what we are doing. Are we cutting them or not? Are we cutting certain programs or not? And how will those agencies spend the money? I mean, that's what this budget's about, and that's our responsibility as a legislative branch, is to make sure that government spends the money where they're supposed to spend it. And with collapsing everything under unclassified, I think hides this. And so I think it's irresponsible of this body to even vote on a budget that would allow this to happen. And I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, several years ago, there were delegates, Republican delegates, that got all worked up about the same issue that I'm worked up about here, and they said that we need to call for more transparency in the state spending plan, and we need to not have these types of things in unclassified, and I agree with them. So the Tomlin administration then broke it out in these categories in order so that there's transparency and people know where the money's being spent, and now we're going back to the days when we're hiding the money again. We're hiding it. And again, I'm not suggesting we do 2% in every category, but surely we ought to know what we're spending in each. And I'd like to hear from the agencies to tell us exactly how they're going to spend that unclassified area, so that my vote, I can go back and tell exactly what I voted for or against. I'm just going to tell you, I mean, that's the responsible thing to do, Mr. Chairman. So however you want to proceed with that, I leave it to your discretion.
All right, are there any amendments? All right, seeing no amendments. Is there amendments? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we can do that. Felicia, can you see? Senator from Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I look through this, and particularly when you start looking at the Development Office, when we zero out the ARC assessment, the Appalachian Regional Commission assessment, just exactly does that make us not a participant of the Appalachian Regional Commission, or?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just asking him to answer your question. I think, no, it's still very much a program in the development, would you say the development
It's in the Development Office. Yeah. It's one of the ones that are zeroed out.
Well, it's zeroed and shoved to unclassified. So, but the funding, the money is still there.
I mean, in a case like that, would it not be better to, since like organizations that we're a part of, and since we're the only state totally in the Appalachian Regional Commission, it would make sense to me that we would keep that, whatever assessment,
that would be
every state.
That would be perfectly fine. We're willing to accept that as an amendment. It would take us, amendments like that we can fix. We appreciate your comments. Would you like to, that's a friendly amendment I would accept. I mean, we
okay, now and let me go to one other one, and I don't know exactly how this works. I'm just inquiring on it. On the international offices, the state of West Virginia, and I happened to be in 1989 in Nagoya when we set up the international office and said that our office would be in Nagoya, Japan. And, having a meeting with Mr. Toyota and Mr. Honda and all of the others that were there in the Chubu region, does this then take away our international offices there?
No. It basically, we know, in meeting with the Secretary, that these particular programs are central to their mission. That cash is still there in the unclassified line. We don't expect that he would cancel that out. But, that would be another one that we could restore back in the language. But there were some of those that are in that list that were those 501c3s that the Secretary said that we don't know, they're just pass-throughs. So our attempt was to, and maybe it needs to be corrected, but to basically give unclassified some of these, and then the Secretary could keep going the things that he committed that he would keep going.
Okay, so if it's a R, it's a restricted what they can spend it on.
Yeah, if you, I mean, in theory, you could spend more money on that particular line if you wanted to. You know,
So, but it wouldn't affect the personnel that they have there. That's
No.
all under their personnel
No.
lines. And then explain to me, you mentioned something about the Hatfield-McCoys, and just so I understand exactly what you're
I
saying
think in
on
that account, Hatfield-McCoy's was treated the same way, but we, as we saw it, it was something that I missed personally, and trying to keep that one under our jurisdiction so that that one's been restored back to its $202,000 on your system. The first PDF of the committee substitute had it zeroed out. It wasn't zeroed out. The money was just shipped unclassified to be spent by. So there are several of those that are in that position that we could go back in and you know, take out of the unclassified and put back. But in the attempt to get the budget done and so forth, that's how that was done. So,
Okay, thank
but
you.
we'll restore the ARC back.
The other one that I have,
Would you like the international offices restored? I mean, we'll do them both.
no, your explanation was fine with me. That was up to the head of commerce, and that they have the
Right.
discretion to do that.
Correct.
In that case, it's a discretionary item, and I don't really see that. I mean, we're the ones that have added those in, sometimes at their discretion and things like that. But make sure I understand this, and this probably goes back to the questions that the senator from Berkeley was asking. When I looked at the adjutant generals and I look at the Mountaineer Challenge Academy and all those are cut 2%, and they're...
Correct.
Are we still under the, at one time under the Mountaineer Challenge Academy, we had to show a certain amount of money of support from the state to be able to match additional funds. Is that still the case where we have to show it as a line item?
Yes, I'm informed by my analyst that there's directive language under the appropriation that answers that question.
So there wouldn't need to be, it could
No.
be done the way that it is and still protect the Mountaineer Challenge Academy as we have in the past.
Exactly from what he says, yes.
Okay, and now what you I think did tell us was the Promise Scholarship, which is in two portions of the budget, correct?
Yes, the Promise Scholarship, I believe, has $18 million in general revenue, and then obviously the lottery accounts, which he talked about, which we're not balancing. Well, we kind of are, but we're not required constitutionally, but there's money in the lottery. I think it's $29 million in excess lottery. How much is Promise in excess lottery? It's $29 million in excess lotteries. So yes, all the spending authority for the PIA, for the pension systems, Medicaid, higher ed, these are the big ones. And if you're going to go to bigger cuts to 70, 80, 90 million, you'd have to go into those lines. So we avoided that. You know, and basically from my perspective, as I've said it before, the baseline cuts combined the governor's budget and our cuts reach into the $122 to $123 million range. In the areas that you can do that, you cannot cut the school aid formula. You would not cut the matching money of Medicaid and other programs in Medicaid. There's a lot, and you cannot cut the lease agreements. So you're down to like a billion or less of the state budget where you can reach out and grab money, of which 86 million was already done in this budget by the governor, and $96 million last year, and higher ed budget's down $60 million in the last 4 years. So the challenge has been to try to deal with this revenue shortfall, and given the realities of what goes on in this building this month, this is the best we can come up with without digging into those programs that you and I both know would be detrimental to the state.
Two final questions. One's a request. I think it would be good for us to see fiscal year 14, 15, 16, and 17 in a spreadsheet showing not overall, just the total amount of general revenue to show how much we've cut over those.
Yeah, when you look at that, some people jump back at you and say it doesn't look like you've cut anything, but in actual fact, you've got, as you know, being education chairman before, you've got some natural growth in the school aid formula, you've got some natural growth in the Medicaid line. If you could just take those out, and the revenue secretary's behind you, he could give it to you, and just deal with those sections that don't have natural growth that you can't control, you can see significant budget reductions over those years. We have those. They wouldn't be easily seen, but yes, we have those. We have the cuts to higher ed, every institution. All that information's available from our office. And you know, I've been trying to say that as finance chairman, that as we've walked into this crisis, that this isn't like we've been spending like drunken sailors or whatever, that there's been a lot of cuts prior to this, and this budget's just simply a reflection of digging into some things that will be painful to the people that experience it, but not getting to those big areas yet that hopefully we will not have to go to one of these days.
In all due respect, being here for 24 years, listening to some members of this body and the body on the other side, it sounds like they act like we have done that for 24 years. And to be honest with you, as a person that's been here when we started the rainy day fund and when we started the payoffs of the pension liabilities, the most appalling thing I've heard over the last 3 or 4 weeks or a month and a half is some member saying that we should refinance our pension liability on teachers' retirement, when that is in formula and we've got 18 more years to fund that. I just can't believe that somebody that's supposed to be a financial person would say that. Thank you.
That's an editorial comment. I would say I've been here 22 years, and there have been those who've been, if I can take a second of personal privilege, but I was reviewing, and you were here as well, Senator, when we basically fixed the pension system. We moved it into the 20th century and put it in the equity markets. And I know that had we not done that, we'd be down $2 to $3 billion in position, paying hundreds of millions more. So I've tried to say to folks, then we voted for almost $500 million in tax decreases in this body over the years with third-party bad faith. I know this will make some shudder a little bit, but premiums were saved and workers' compensation premiums were saved. So, Senator, I think you and I have been around here and seen $5 to $6 to $7 billion of either tax cuts or savings to the state. And we've probably overshot on the revenue side in what we've cut. But, we're now dealing with the new legislature, and maybe some don't recognize all that. So, yeah, we're going to shut you off. But I digress. But we're on the amendment stage. Do you have more to say? And Senator from Marion, did you have something that you wanted to ask? Are there any others? Okay, Senator from Fayette, isn't it? Or Fayette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question in Section 45 related to appropriations of the State Board of Education, and more specifically the educational program allowance line item.
Correct.
I noticed that has been zeroed out, and the original budget bill by the governor included appropriations from education program allowance line item for what are considered isolated rural schools. And basically we have I think $100,000 Webster County Board of Education for Hacker Valley, $150,000 Randolph County Pickens School, $100,000 for Preston County Aurora School and Fayette County Meadow Bridge School. And again, that's commonly referred to as isolated school monies, where we have some public schools in locations in incredibly rural areas that may not be able to sustain themselves absent that funding. Has that basically just been...
Yes, you're reading that correctly, and it saddens me that you are.
Okay.
But as we go through the process, and if we find revenue or whatever, we can try to restore those lines.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm fully aware of what you're talking about. Any other amendments or questions? Okay, I now recognize the Vice Chairman to make his motion again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that Senate Bill 1001, the COM sub for Senate Bill 1001 be advanced to the Senate with recommendation that do pass.
Motion's before you. Are there any discussion of the motion? Senator from Marshall.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I gave you either a promotion or demotion. I'm not sure in this day and age when things are sometimes what's up, down, and down's up. But in any event, I have grave concerns, obviously, about the budget as presented, particularly the huge, unprecedented rating of the rainy day fund of $135 to $141 million, assuming we get $5 million back somewhere. I'm cognizant of the fact I think the liquid portion of that fund, rainy day A's, may be in the range of $350 to $380. I can't remember the exact number, but
388.
You start taking $141 million out of, or 135 of that out, you're nearly depleting it by 33% or greater. Without any assurance that the economy of this state's going to turn in the short term, let alone the long term, I'm afraid that just raiding our savings account to get out of town is not an appropriate measure for us to responsibly deal with the problems that are facing our state. We need some more revenue, and you know that, I know that, and everybody in here knows that, that's willing to face the truth. And to just pass a budget because it's expedient to do so, or our partners, our colleagues across the aisle, we think it's the best they can do. It's certainly not the best the people of this state can do, and certainly what they deserve. This state, or this budget, if we pass it, is a temporary patchwork measure at best, and if the ongoing pattern of continued decline in our economy continues to occur during July, August, September, October, November, I don't see this being a fix that's going to get us past Labor Day, let alone Memorial Day, Mr. Chairman. For that reason, I would urge the rejection of this and get back to the drawing board, and would ask and demand the yeas and nays on the vote.
All right, thank you. Whether I'm out of order or not, I'll just briefly respond briefly, but obviously if we can, timing is everything in life. I know it is in a golf swing. And if we can get revenue measures out of here successfully through this body, this budget can be revisited and everything changed. All right, the motion is before you. The yeas and nays have been called for. Is there any more discussion? All right, I'll have the clerk call the roll. Yes. All right, the motion passes 9-8. Recognize the Vice Chairman for a motion.
Move we adjourn.
Motion is we adjourn. All in favor say aye. Opposed the same. Motion carries.